on Fubar Radio.
Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Zoe Grunewald.
And me, Ali Milani.
Next week is the Gorton and Denton by-election. What is at stake for each major party? Before that, we'll be breaking down what's at risk as we look at some of Reform UK's shocking new appointments.
As always, you can find us at Politics Uncensored UK on social media.
But first, it's the Week Unwrapped. Ali, it is a happy 66th birthday to Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, who has today been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. In their statement, Thames Valley Police said that they are carrying out searches at the address in Berkshire and Norfolk and that Andrew remains in police custody at this time. This marks the first time in British history that a senior working royal has been formally arrested. If Andrew does go to prison, to be honest, it's not going to be much of a change for him. He'll go from living in a big building under his brother's pleasure at the expense of the British taxpayer to living in a big building under his brother's pleasure at the expense of the British taxpayer. In fact, he'll probably end up costing us a little bit less than he did before.
It's a slightly smaller room, though, no?
Potentially. It might not be to his liking, to his taste. Yeah. But apparently he did leave, allegedly, the Royal Lodge in a state of disrepair. So maybe it'll be exactly as he remembers it.
No, I can't say that. I'm going to really behave myself.
We have to be careful what we can say here because this is now a live ongoing investigation. It's worth just reading out Thames Valley's police statement, which they released this morning. They said, as part of the investigation, we have today arrested a man in his 60s from Norfolk on suspicion of misconduct in public office and are carrying out searches at addresses in Berkshire and Norfolk. The man remains in police custody at this time. It's worth noting that Andrew has not been arrested on charges of any kind of sex offence. Obviously, we know this is all linked to allegations that have come out following the release of the Epstein files. This is nothing to do with allegations of sex trafficking or anything to do with sex offences. This is particularly the allegation or the suspicion of misconduct in public office.
Yeah, so the last time someone as senior as Andrew was detained by the police was the 17th century.
Wow.
When Parliament forces King Charles I to be detained during the Civil War. He was then executed in 1649. I don't know if Andrew's going to head down the same road.
It's nowhere near as kind of epic as that, is it?
I'm not calling for that.
You have missed, of course, the fact that in 2001, Princess Anne was convicted after her dog attacked children in Windsor Great Park. She pled guilty under the Dangerous Dogs
Was
Act.
she arrested for that? Presumably.
I don't think she was arrested. She was fined. She was not formally arrested, but she faced legal consequences, and she was fined for having out of control dangerous dogs.
Yeah, I mean, other famous royals that have been elected. Mary, Queen of Scots, spent years in prison before her execution on charges of plotting against Queen Elizabeth I.
Of course,
It's so careful.
Anyway, at least Andrew has finally done something consequential with his time as a royal.
Yeah, it's I was watching today. Do you remember his interview with
Emily Maitlis?
Emily Maitlis.
Yeah,
historic, iconic British moment that will go down in history, I think.
Absolutely.
Do you think he's sweating now?
I always said that one of the funniest, well, not the funniest, but one of the most interesting parts of the Epstein emails for me was the photo of, allegedly, I should say, of Prince Andrew on all fours. It did look an awful lot like Prince Andrew, sweating profusely.
Yeah, I saw a really funny tweet this week, and I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but I think me and you have spoken about it off air, that all of these emails on the Epstein files are literally like, with the subject line, "Here are my crimes, dear receiver, isn't it? Didn't you enjoy all those crimes we committed last week? Ha ha ha! Here's attached photos of all our crimes."
Yeah, it's like
kind regards.
It's like, I really enjoyed getting pizza with you last night. By the way, can you send me that video of the torture?
Yes.
It's like, come on, guys, subtlety. But I mean, it shows you a lot about how these people felt.
So, can I ask, broadly speaking, because I was asked about it a little bit doing other press, how much of a concern is this for the Royals? Is there a sort of, as much as government and Starmer and Labour have taken a lot of hits on the Mandelson stuff, could this at all move the dial in people's views and perspectives on the royal family?
I think absolutely. I think all of this, you have to think of the background to all of this, which is the continuous drip of stories about Andrew's conduct when he was trade envoy. Potentially, from the Epstein files, it looked as if Andrew had been sharing privileged and confidential information with Epstein and other people from his role as trade envoy. There were questions about potentially people being smuggled into Buckingham Palace without people's notice. Andrew's security staff potentially or allegedly looking the other way. I mean, all of this stuff is reported in the press, and this is the context of which this arrest has happened. So whenever there's something like this happens, there's always questions about how many people knew, how many people were protected, how long this all went on for. Obviously, we should say that obviously this is a live investigation, and Andrew has always strenuously denied wrongdoing. But, you know, this isn't a story that's going to go away. And I think when it has been years and years in the making, there are lots of questions to answer for all kinds of parties.
Because I also saw that there were reports that the late Queen Elizabeth II, once the pictures came out of Andrew, the initial pictures of him with Virginia Giuffre, I think. Giuffre, sorry, that she backed him basically. And so
she was said to be his favourite.
Yeah.
He was said to be her favourite. Really? Sorry. Yes. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on this. Now this is a police matter. It's very, very hard for us to comment further on it, but of course we'll keep you updated in the weeks and months to come as this case progresses. Okay, we're going to talk about UK unemployment. There's been some bad news for the government this week, particularly Rachel Reeves, after UK unemployment has hit its highest rate for nearly 5 years. And of course, it always will be the case that those between 16 and 24 years old are bearing the brunt, with the unemployment rate rising to 16.1%. That is the highest in more than 10 years. UK retailers are planning to cut staff hours and jobs amid rising employment costs and pessimism about the economy. And for those in work, wages are still rising faster than prices, but the rate at which they're growing continued to slow. Many businesses say they've slowed hiring and point to measures in Chancellor Rachel Reeves' last 2 budgets, including a hike in employer national insurance contributions and a rise in the minimum wage, as increasing their costs. Obviously, this is really bad news for a Labour government particularly. You know, a Labour government does not want youth unemployment to rise, or unemployment to rise at all under its books. It suggests something about the balance between businesses and the labour market has gone wrong. What do you make of this? How problematic is this?
No, I think it's definitely problematic because this is the area that Labour governments and governments across the world on the sort of, or in the Western world on the centre left to the left, are anxious about, because it's the stick that's often beaten progressives with when you introduce either it's upscaling trade union negotiations and laws, or minimum wage, or introducing taxes or rises like national insurance. The most common criticism that you get hit with is that it has an impact on the jobs that these finance bosses and major companies will allow for, basically. And so it's something that I think not just this Labour government, but generally centre-left governments are really, really conscious and cognizant of. And so it's a huge problem. I will say I think some of the conversations around the minimum wage are in like desperately bad faith and nonsensical. The idea that the increase in minimum wage is somehow the minimum wage is to be blamed for the rise in unemployment generally, as well as youth unemployment, is just nonsensical. We've had the minimum wage, almost 30 years? And there's never been any evidence that there's a direct correlation between minimum wage and unemployment or the cutting of jobs. I actually think this is probably more to do with the national insurance, particularly in smaller and medium-sized organizations and companies and businesses, who have been saying that that's been hitting their bottom line and their ability to hire staff. But there's also just a general pessimism around the economy. And I don't know, I just feel like there's a general pessimism around the UK. And that obviously, one of the most remarkable things that, you know, when I studied economics at university, one of the sort of glass break moments for me was how much of the economy is
vibes based.
It's vibes based, exactly. Yeah. It's just on how people feel, their confidence. That's a great term. It's just vibes based, right? And
it's all made up.
Yeah, and so I actually wouldn't completely cut off the scandals around government that have nothing to do with the economy with the feeling of faith. So, for example, I'll give you an example. I got a text message, during the time that it seemed like Starmer was going to resign. I have a couple of people I know who I sit with at the football who work in sort of stock markets, that sort of sector. I don't actually quite know what they do. So Chris, give me a shout with what you actually do at the next game. But they were like, oh, the gilt market is going crazy. Is Starmer about to resign? And so clearly the markets have an eye on the general the stability of the government, if you will. And so I don't think those things are unrelated. I don't know if the unemployment rate is linked to that, but there's certainly an element of faith and confidence. And so broadly speaking, I don't know if you agree, there's just a general pessimism around the UK in general.
I think confidence can knock things like investment, which of course have a knock-on impact on businesses starting up, taking risk, all of those things.
But also expanding. So if you don't think
exactly,
that the UK is going to get better, are you going to expand and grow?
I think basically what we have here is a series of decisions that have made it very difficult for businesses. I mean, there's also been some blame laid at the door of the Employment Rights Bill, which again, I think some of those arguments are in bad faith. But there are lots of things in the Employment Rights Bill that make a lot of sense and are very popular, like ending fire and rehire and strengthening discrimination laws. But I think the problem is that all of it's kind of come at once. Also, businesses are struggling with things like business rates, which obviously was a recent government U-turn. But I think you're absolutely right. The biggest most impactful and consequential policy was the decision to raise employer national insurance, which of course has a huge impact on businesses' hiring ability and how much they can pay. And all of this, of course, is pressurized by whether people feel they have any spending power. So if they're going out, if they're actually using these businesses, using these services, if people have, it's a sort of a vicious circle. If people have depressed wages, they go out and spend less. So I think you're absolutely right. We're in a sort of economic doom loop at the minute. But the other thing that is particularly concerning about this is youth unemployment, because on the one hand, we have a problem with people not in education, employment or training, young people coming out of university, graduates unable to find jobs, young people unable to find apprenticeships, whatever it is. But at the same time, all of this is happening where these companies don't want to take risks on low-trained workers, so younger workers. And we also have, of course, artificial intelligence, which is starting to eliminate some of those graduate entry-level jobs. So it is a real mess of difficult
So one of the things I was going to ask, I think you've answered, but just to clarity, was why is it specifically youth unemployment that's risen? And my question was, given all of the context that we've spoken about, is it just that people aged 16 to 24 are likely to be at the lowest rung of the company ladder and more likely to get cut?
Yes, and also they need training and patience. And if you are a job looking at where you can make cuts, it just is more costly to hire a young person who needs more training and investment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I actually think that national insurance increase is probably the singular had the most impact.
I mean, it was such a lazy and cowardly way of trying to raise tax.
Yeah.
They thought it wouldn't be noticed by workers because it wasn't a direct cut to their national insurance contributions or rise to their national insurance contributions. But of course, it will always be passed on to workers and it affects businesses too. Why not just raise income tax across the board? Anyway, let's move on. Keir Starmer has said that no platform gets a free pass as he's announced a crackdown on social media sites. The government has announced a sweeping crackdown on tech firms to protect children from illegal content, and this comes after Elon Musk's AI-generated sexualised images of women without consent, and in some cases even created sexualised images of minors. This crackdown will include measures to eliminate vile illegal content created by AI and could even open the door to an Australia-style age limit on social media. It's also going to shut down the loophole that has allowed chatbots to produce illegal content. We've talked a lot about social media, particularly the idea of a social media ban for under 16s. It looks like the government might be heading that way. Spain's announced it. Australia's done it.
Yeah.
It's been limitedly successful thus far for Australia. Kids have figured out, as kids do, exactly how to get around it. I feel like I go back and forth on this. I mean, I think the government has to do something. And I think being strong with tech companies and trying to force them to self-regulate whilst, throwing out the possibility of taking away under 16s, I think is an important way to do that. And I think we have to always be prepared to follow along with our word there. But I think long term, banning kids from social media, it feels like the easy way out. It feels like letting tech platforms off the hook a little bit.
It is. I agree. I don't like it. One of the things to change my mind on this is I had a conversation with Ro Khanna who's the congressman in California, Silicon Valley, and he's very knowledgeable on AI. And I think we're approaching this the wrong way. I now think we're approaching this the wrong way. The problem here is the algorithms. It's not the social media platforms in and of themselves. I have separate problems with the social media platforms in and of themselves, but the algorithms are completely unregulated. So I think the concern isn't so much that kids are getting their hands on this, because if there's illegal content being created, for example, the stuff that we saw around the grok and the sexualization of women without their consent, and all these images that were produced, and then including of minors, that's obviously not a problem just if kids see it. That's a problem if everybody sees it. And so I think there needs to be very specified work that's done in this area by the government, where they create a specific department on the algorithm, and the algorithm gets regulated, so that what these AI sort of organizations and OpenAI and Grok and others are able to produce is regulated. How the algorithm pushes certain content onto your feed is regulated. That's an area of intervention I think that the government is missing, and something that we're eventually going to have to do. So in the same way that Ofcom and Ipso, for example, it probably took a long time for them to be created, but came in place because there had to be some regulation as to what companies and organizations are allowed to put on your screen. I think the same is true of social media. We're just a little bit behind on that algorithm being regulated. So I don't like just a blanket ban for under 16s. I don't like this 48-hour stuff. You've got 48 hours. So you're telling me if Grok takes a woman's picture without her consent and takes her clothes off, 48 hours, it just sits on the platform? What should be happening is an intervention before Grok is able to make that photo, or OpenAI or others are able to produce that content. And that's all in the back office. That's all in the algorithm that sits behind the platform. And the government needs to create a specific department that works, with these tech companies to create some form of legitimate regulation, similar to the early days of Ofcom and IPSA, that looks at the algorithm behind these systems, because then...
I think you're completely right. My only issue is I think this is the whole, and there's literally a live court case going on about this at the minute, right? How addictive are social media platforms. It seems to me that the whole business model of these social media platforms is to have an addictive...
Yeah, but isn't that the algorithm?
Have it as an addictive algorithm as possible, because that is how they market their products.
Yeah.
They have to keep people there scrolling and scrolling. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. And it was so good when, social media was a genuinely democratic platform where people could talk like it was a town square and they were listening to their peers. Now it has become the ultimate channel of just pushing whatever propaganda or product or whatever it is, whoever holds the keys, into your phone. And I don't see how we get back. I feel like the horse is bolted.
Maybe.
Yeah, but I think I agree with what you're saying.
I mean, the likelihood is that just the pushback from big tech will be so severe that no government will
because
have the
that is their
courage to
whole
do it,
business model.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe in a different world. Okay, that is it for the Week Unwrapped. But stay tuned, as we're coming up after the break. We're going to be looking at the disturbing new appointments in Reform UK's fake shadow cabinet. Stay tuned.
Follow us at Politics Uncensored UK for more from the show.
Welcome back. You're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Zoe Grunewald.
And me, Ali Milani.
Nigel Farage has announced his own fake shadow cabinet. He's playing a proper dress up as Prime Minister. We'd love to see it. The party has stated what roles its leading members would take up if they were to win a general election. Alongside this and several other policy announcements, Reform UK has instated a man called James Orr, a staunch anti-abortion Christian, as their head of policy. In fact, James Orr has said a manner of remarkable and alarming things, which we'll get into in the show. But first, Ali, let's talk a little bit about the shadow cabinet. So let me just take you through the hellscape we could be living in come 2029, where Robert Generic is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Zia Youssef, who is one of the most irate men I've ever seen perform in the press, would be Shadow Home Secretary. He's obviously promised to stop the channel crossings and derogate from any international treaty which frustrates or appends deportations, which presumably would make him one of the most popular Shadow Home Secretaries globally. I'm sure he'll have lots of friends and lots of people will want to sit next to him at diplomatic dinners. Richard Tice, who doesn't believe in net zero. In fact, he calls it net stupid zero, which is very mature and intellectual of him, will be the Deputy Prime Minister and Secretary for Business, Trade and Energy. Suella Braverman, Shadow Secretary of State for Education and Skills, despite herself not possessing any. Completing his shadow cabinet appointments, Braverman will be tasked on taking on the world of DEI in her new brief, because, as we all know, DEI is absolutely the font of all our problems. And just in case you were wondering what happened to 30p Lee, he will remain as the party's chief whip. No promotion for him, despite being the first Tory MP to reform. Poor Lee Anderson. Reform MPs Danny Kruger, Andrew Rosendale, Sarah Pochant are yet to receive official roles. And James Orr, who is a very frightening character, will become head of policy. Ali, take me through your thoughts on this.
So we'll talk about James Orr after the next one. Can I just say quickly, you don't get to do this. So for folks that don't know, a shadow cabinet is reserved for Her Majesty's opposition, which is the second biggest party in Parliament. They get to create a shadow cabinet because they get to hold the government to account at the dispatch box and other things. So it's not like a party just creates shadow cabinet. This isn't real, right? This is tantamount to me putting on the Batman cowl and then going down into Soho and pretending I'm fighting crime. Doesn't make me
Thank you for saying
Batman.
It's not real, because I feel like we needed that reassurance, because it really does.
You don't get to just
awful.
create a shadow cabinet. A shadow cabinet, you're invited by His Majesty to create a shadow cabinet, and they're not the largest second party. So you can't just do that, right? So not only is it a shit let me start that again. Not only is it a shit shadow cabinet, it's a fake shadow cabinet as well. And I just want to take a moment before we go to the break, just a moment of silence and thought for Lee Anderson, who continues to do whatever his boss Nigel Farage tells him to do, and still, having gone to 3 different parties, can't get any big jobs because anyone who gets within 30 seconds of him can see he's a talentless charlatan.
To be fair, don't knock party chief whip. I think with the cast
6 people.
Well, hang on. With the cast of characters that are Reform UK and how ambitious and unpleasant most of them are, I think he actually might have his work cut out for him.
Also, Z Yusuf in his Twitter bio has named himself Shadow Home Secretary. Brother, you're not even an MP. My guy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I'm the new leader of Reform UK.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can take a shadow cabinet position.
Okay, look, we're going to go to a quick break so Ali can break his Ramadan fast. And when we come back, we're going to be spitting more facts about this terrible cast of characters. See you then.
It's Ali Milani and Zoe Grunewald with Politics Uncensored. Fubar Radio.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the new shadow cabinet. And we were talking about...
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
You know that break where that very kindly, the Fubar team have let me break my... Was that DEI?
that was DEI.
Okay.
Yeah, Suella Braverman wouldn't be having any of that. That was woke nonsense, Ali. I mean, I think what's really interesting about this is the priorities that Reform UK have clearly identified. Because when you're announcing your shadow cabinet and their briefs, you're saying to the country, these are the things that we think are most important, right? So it's no surprise that we have stopping channel crossings, which is like, oh, great, yeah, that sounds great. Everyone can kind of agree that's probably a good thing. Or how are we going to do it? Well, we're just going to upend all our international treaties and send people back. And then you have to ask the question, okay, how are you going to send people back? And they'll say, oh, we'll just put them in a boat and send them back to where they came from. What about if you don't know where they came from? What if they threw their passport on the sea on the way over? Okay, yeah, all right. So where are you going to send them? What if the country of origin doesn't want to take them back? What, you're just going to push boats up to their shores and say you've got to take them? I mean, it's so politically naive, and it falls away as soon as you put any scrutiny on it.
I also think you're right in that it tells you their priorities, because what's missing from here, right? Shadow Secretary of State for Health, nothing on health.
No.
Shadow Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs in the Commonwealth, nothing on foreign affairs in the Commonwealth. 2 principal roles of government, which is our relationship and safety abroad and our National Health Service here at home, are critically missing. Well, one, Nigel Farage has continuously been accused of being in favour of insurance-style privatisation system, no healthcare. Even though they had MPs left, they had Danny Kruger, they had Sarah Pochin, they had Andrew Rosendale, right? Lee Anderson, poor fella, right? He can't get a job. But they still didn't. They put Secretary of State for Business, Trade and Energy, which is an important position, obviously, but it's not one of the what we call the great officers of state.
And importantly, Richard Tice, who is a massive net zero skeptic. Yeah. I mean, really, just like has drunk the Kool-Aid and just throws out all the scientific evidence about net zero. Like you can't even debate with this man. It's just he doesn't really believe in climate change.
Does he understand climate change? Do you think?
I think this is Richard Tice's world and we're all just living in it kind of thing. Like he just cares about what's best for business.
Yeah.
And this idea that we need, one of the key things is actually education and skills, and this task we're taking on the world of diversity, equity and inclusion. I mean, this is straight out the Trumpian playbook, isn't it?
Well, it's just interesting to me, that you get Tice at Business, Trade and Energy, you get Suella at Education and Skills, which obviously is very important, but again, like, you got nothing to say on the health service.
You're absolutely right.
Given the number of the backlog in the waiting list, we've just had a major story break through about a bone cement and the problems in distribution of getting that bone cement means lots of elective appointments are being pushed back, and we're going to probably miss some key targets for elective surgeries. I mean, these things are quite fundamental. And there's been an active choice not to include them. Should we talk about James Orr?
We should talk about James Orr. So James Orr is going to be the new head of policy for reform. He said that the incoming Reform UK government would have to force nasty cough medicine down the country's throat. Maybe he's also going to be the health secretary, says the man hoping to shape the party's policies. Okay, here's what you need to know about James Orr. He's an associate professor of philosophy of religion at Cambridge University and a friend of US Vice President J.D. Vance. He is a Christian. He has described asylum seekers as invaders. He opposes abortion in all cases, including rape. He is also the person who lured Tom Skinner, the Bosch man from The Apprentice, into reform politics. Apparently he invited Skinner to speak at Now in England and is likely the person who introduced, I can't believe I'm saying this, Tom Skinner to J.D. Vance. This is significant. What we have seen over the past year or so is the gradual inclusion of pretty hardline Christian evangelical activists into Reform's rank. Obviously, we had Danny Kruger, who is known to be a Christian Conservative MP defect to Reform. James Orr is really pretty religious, and we also know that Reform UK has been increasingly courted by this lobby group, this US lobby group called the Alliance Defending Freedom, which helped overturn Roe v. Wade, the abortion rights legislation in the US, and has a very kind of evangelical Christian approach to politics. They want basically the Christian word to be embedded in all political teachings across the globe, and they've slowly been expanding their influence into the UK, including helping to organise Nigel Farage's visit to Congress, where he was speaking about free speech. I think what's really interesting about this is that before Reform UK existed, Farage never spoke about abortion, right? And obviously that was an undeniably awkward fit for his image, a pub-friendly libertarian, allergic to moral instruction. Yet in late 2024, Farage began calling for a debate on the current 24-week limit, citing advances in neonatal care. So that is, of course, that you can have an abortion up to 24 weeks if doctors agree. By spring 2025, he was raising the issue more regularly, insisting, though, that he had no newfound interest in reproductive politics. He just wanted there to be a debate in the House of Commons. At the same time, we've got this string of former MPs, including Danny Kruger, Andrea Jenkins, Maria Caulfield, who have joined the Reform Party. These individuals have previously voted against buffer zone protections, opposed early medical abortion at home, and advocated for tighter restrictions. Ali, what do you think this tells us about the potential creep of anti-abortion politics into Reform UK?
Oh, I think it's massive, and I think it's not spoken about enough. First of all, just off the side, I always find it remarkable when I hear someone who describes themselves as a sort of Christian conservative and a Christian at heart, and that those Christian values drive their politics, and then they call asylum seekers as invaders. Because last time I read one of the most fundamental stories in Christianity, Jesus in Bethlehem, what was he? Just out of curiosity. Refugee, I thought. Very, very Christian position there by Professor Orr. Generally, I think there needs to be a serious conversation about Reform UK's position on abortion, because I now think it's gone beyond. So we spoke about the Alliance
Defending Freedom.
The
ADF, they're known
ADF,
as for shorthand.
I was about to say the ADL, but they're in Germany, aren't they?
The AFD is a German far-right political party. The ADF, not to be confused with, is the Christian lobby group in the US.
So we spoke about previously about the ADF and their facilitation of Nigel Farage, and whether that would influence reform policy as it pertains to abortion. We now have James Orr, who is very open about his positions on and his opposition to abortion, even in the cases of rape. And so I think there generally needs to be a conversation around whether abortion rights are safe in reform hands, because this is an issue that I think quite differently to America. There isn't broad opposition in this country. If you look at polling, if you, in my experience, just talking to people, focus groups, all the evidence that's before us, also electoral patterns on the ballot paper, the country doesn't want a significant change in abortion laws. If anything, it doesn't want to reverse them, certainly.
About 90% in the UK support the right to choose.
Well, there you go, right? So I think there needs to be a serious conversation about whether what reform's policy on abortion will be, and whether that 90% view will be represented in government, or whether, and I think you've spoken about this before, it doesn't take much for these laws to get, or these practices to get reversed.
Yeah, so I think the lesson from the US that is really important is not that it needs to be some kind of big plebiscite to change hearts and minds. You don't need an outright vote to ban abortion. Actually, in the US, it's always been about 60-40 that abortion should be legal. But what groups like the ADF realised was that they could actually still restrict access by pulling specific levers. So in the US, for example, in September 2021, Texas introduced something called the Senate Bill 8, which was a law that effectively banned abortion after around 6 weeks before many women realised they were pregnant. There have been other sorts of laws. So in other states, the TRAP laws, which are the targeted regulation of abortion providers, imposed medically unnecessary requirements on clinics, which forced many to close without banning abortion outright. This basically meant that they had to have certain equipment and certain standards to stay open, and many of them just simply couldn't afford to do that. There was also a lawsuit which was backed by the ADF, which sought to revoke the FDA's approval of a particular drug, by challenging a regulatory decision which was made decades earlier. None of this was a kind of outright public campaign to change consent, to remove public consent. It was ways of chipping away at access to abortion healthcare that actually meant that abortion was technically legal, but that access had steadily collapsed and women couldn't receive that kind of healthcare. And I think that is important, because there would never be, under a reform government, I don't think, legislation passed to remove access to abortion. What you would see instead is the slow removal of access by taking away funding, by imposing specific regulations so clinics have to close, by possibly changing the terms. Because we have to remember, in this country, abortion is still a criminal offence unless under certain conditions. It is not protected in the law. And the reason the issue here feels settled is simply one of access. Any government could chip away at that access with the right lobby group.
And it's important to note that when Donald Trump first ran for president in 2016, there wasn't a wide-scale view in American politics that Roe v. Wade would be overturned. In fact, the view was, even with Donald Trump, they're not going to go after Roe v. Wade. This isn't going to be overturned, right?
It's too big, and the public support isn't there.
And the public support isn't there. But it did happen. And I would just caution anyone who thinks that because that number might be 90% of the country, that reform won't touch this. Or even I would caution, because remember, Donald Trump had publicly stated his position that he was in favour. He was pro-choice, if you will. And that position obviously changed, but even that made people think that he won't go after this as hard as some of the skeptics are saying. But he did. And I would caution against people who think reform won't take an extreme position on things like this because of public support or public positioning, or even I would caution people thinking Nigel Farage's own position, which may be a libertarian perspective, would protect the country. Because, you know, once a government gets in place, it becomes more than Nigel Farage, and the groundswell of support that comes from the membership and from whatever their parliamentary party looks like and their councillors across the country looks like might have a significant impact. The key thing I would say to people here listening is, just because you agree with Nigel Farage, even though I might disagree with them on this issue, but just because you agree with Nigel Farage on certain ideological issues, people who take extreme policy position on one thing are likely to take them on others. And so, look, the fact of the matter is a lot of people might support Nigel Farage because of his policies on immigration, but fundamentally disagree with his positions on the NHS and privatisation and insurance-based system, fundamentally disagree with whatever reform policy may be, or James Orr's position might be on abortion rights and women's healthcare, for example. You have to think that if they take an extreme position on this, they're likely to take it on that and on other things as well. That's how governments like this have operated across Europe and in America. And you have to think about that, I would advise, when you're considering supporting these people. Because you may agree with them on the immigration stuff, but do you really want to see your insurance, the NHS dismantled and replaced with an American-style insurance system? Do you really want to see abortion rights and access limited in this country? You know, these are important things that we have to speak about. And abortion rights, I'm seeing here, have condemned the move. So Abortion Rights has condemned Reform UK's decision to appoint Professor James Orr, a theologian known for his hardline opposition to abortion in all circumstances, as senior advisors to party leader Nigel Farage. I really do think women could have a significant role to play in the next general election, particularly not just on abortion, but on a wide-scale range of issues, including the safety stuff we've spoken about, policing that we've spoken about on this show, but yes, abortion, healthcare, and even things like immigration.
I think the other thing that's worth pointing out just before we move on is that this, the Reform government has been particularly harping on about free speech. And that might feel like a separate issue to all of this, but it's actually not. It's quite heavily tied to what we're talking about here. So you might remember that appearance before Congress that Nigel Farage went to was facilitated by the ADF, and he was arguing that Britain faces a free speech crisis. That basically the ADF have found a way to get involved in UK politics by using free speech as an in rather than abortion, because for the reasons you said, they know abortion isn't a particularly popular topic of conversation here. But they see it as a way to essentially challenge the fact that abortion is settled by sort of putting it in part of a broader conversation about, well, why can't we have these conversations about termlets? Why can't we have these conversations about people praying outside of buffer zones? It's sort of positioning abortion in opposition to religious freedom. So Reform UK might position itself as the party of freedom and liberty, but you have to ask, what particular arguments are they taking up? If, for example, they are supporting the high-profile case of Adam Smith Connor, who was convicted for silently praying in a clinic buffer zone, they might say that is a debate around free speech and religious liberty. But isn't it really about how safe women feel at abortion clinics? And so I would ask anyone who thinks that Nigel Farage is this kind of bastion of freedom and liberty to look at where these arguments are coming from and to look what they might be hiding, because I actually think this reframing is a tactic. It shifts the grounds of the argument. So restrictions are introduced not as limits on reproductive rights, but as protections for speech and belief. And I think James Orr, as you say, Ali, is pivotal in this because, as we know, he desperately believes in religious freedom, but he's also an anti-abortion hardliner.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on because, as we know, the Gorton and Denton by-election is going to be held exactly 1 week from now, and the election it will be on the 26th of February. It's currently being considered a 3-horse race that's too close to call. But, Ali, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you who's going to win it right now.
I think Reform, unfortunately.
Fucking hell, really?
Yeah, I've been in a number of meetings with folks who have been there. I think I'll be there on Saturday in Gorton and Denton.
This Saturday,
before the election. So if you're listening to this after the election, this would be Saturday.
Tell Matt Goodwin that his friend Zoe says hi.
Oh, I will do. Yes, I know he's a big fan. Should I do that before or after I call him a prick?
It's up to you. The order matters not to me. I'm gonna.
Okay, so here's what I've heard about Gordon and Denton. First is that Denton, which was a traditional Labour area, has gone reform. And I was speaking to activists who've been there who've said that streets entirely lined with reform posters, and everyone's saying that they're voting reform. Gorton, which is a little bit more of a diverse area, is a mix. There's definitely a decline in Labour's votes, but some are briefing that and these weren't the people I spoke to, but there's definitely been briefings that Labour's vote is holding up a little bit better than people would have expected, particularly given the Mandelson crisis.
Do you think some of that is a Stop Reform coalition? Is that people holding their nose and being prepared to vote Labour?
So there's definitely the fight between Labour and the Greens is who has the best chance of beating reform, because the Caerphilly election is kind of looming. That people think that there's definitely a Stop Reform vote out there, and whether it's Labour or the Greens, whichever can convince the electorate that they're the best chance at stopping reform are likely to win the election.
But is this not risky because it could split the vote?
Yes, so I think that's what's going to happen.
Yes,
I think reform are going to win. So my guess right now, and I'm not confident in it, I think any three could win. I can see Greens winning, I can see Labour holding on, and I can see reform winning. The reason I think I think reform are going to win is because I think the reform vote is slightly more concrete and less of a bounce between who can stop the others. And I can see reform taking the seat with 28, 29, 30% of the vote, which again is it's nuts that our electoral system will allow Matt Goodwin to become an MP in this seat with something like 28, 27, 29% of the vote. But that's where we are, right? The truth is I'm hearing lots of Labour switches to Green. Particularly in certain sections of the seat. Some areas where the Labour vote is holding. Where Labour has this advantage over the Greens. The Green surge is undeniable. Zach Polanski has done a good job in terms of rising them in the polls, in conversations, in social media coverage. But what the Greens don't have is infrastructure. When you campaign in a seat, one of the big advantages that the big parties have is they have data. So they've knocked on all these doors before. They know where their votes are, and they know that they can where they can target. Smaller parties tend not to have that because they've not had the broad infrastructure and the broad approach to seats where they've necessarily knocked on these doors, right? So Greens will be a little bit behind on infrastructure. And there is certainly something in British politics where there seems to be this tradition in British politics of passing voting patterns down in your family. So my family's always voted Labour. That break is quite hard. I think that break has probably happened with Labour. But what I'm hearing is some of the traditional Labour vote is holding on those traditional lines, if you will. So those are two advantages that Labour have on Greens. The advantages that Green have is obviously momentum. Keir Starmer is going down like a lead balloon on the doorstep, as you would expect. They've asked him to stay well away. He's not on any of the material, any of the literature. The only reason Labour hold Gorton and Denton, if they do hold Gorton and Denton, is because of Andy Burnham. So, and I'm not just saying this because I supported him. I've heard from more than one activist who's been on the door who said people have told them they would have voted for Andy Burnham, but they're actually going to switch to the Greens. As a result, Andy has been out on the doorstep. I think they've asked targeted letters from Andy to voters who were. So there's an option as you knock on doors, people who are saying that they supported Andy Burnham but are considering switching to Greens, for Andy to send them a direct letter. I think he's been out 6 times now on the door alongside
Angeliki Stogia, I think. She's the Labour councillor for Whalley Range in Manchester. So she's representing Labour. We've got Matt Goodwin, who's representing Reform, a British Conservative political commentator, right-wing activist, political scientist, and former academic and hard-right not job.
Can we say friend of the show?
Friend of the show. Hannah Spencer, who is the Green candidate. She is a plumber since leaving school at 16 and is currently training to be a plasterer. She's 34 years old. She also has loads of greyhounds, which is kind of cool. Lib Dems, Jackie Pearcey, local campaigner, served at Governor at Oasis Academy, Aspinall in Gorton for more than 20 years. And on the Conservatives, we have Charlotte Cadden, who was a police officer for 30 years in both Greater Manchester and the Metropolitan Police. Whatever happens next week, you can guarantee that Labour is going to learn exactly the wrong lesson from this, right? Yeah. So if Reform win, they're going to say, see, we should push rightward. We need to be harsh on immigration. We need to be stronger on law and order. We need to be, going after DEI. We need to get Lee Anderson to defect back to Labour, complete the circle. If the Greens win, they're going to be like, right, well, we need to move rightwards.
Yeah, we have to expose that they're soft on
drugs, on NATO. They're all smoking heroin. I'm pretty sure that someone said that earlier. They're all making everyone's boobs bigger.
Do you remember when Boris Johnson had the 2 speeches ready for either way that the Brexit vote would go? Do you think Luke Akehurst is sat somewhere with 3 briefings in his
100%, yeah,
to go out to journalists, all of which say Labour need to move rightwards to win? So Greens have won, Labour have held it, which is evidence that that our strategy of going rightwards is working, and the Greens have won. Therefore, we need to move rightwards and expose their positions on. And
if Labour
Russia
win, they're going to say, "Great, we need to move rightwards. We need to continue doing what we're doing."
Yeah.
I mean, all of it is going to basically conclude that either they need to stick it to the Greens by moving rightwards, or stick it to Reform by moving rightwards.
One thing I will say though, one of the key things about this race, more than any other by-election, is the Prime Minister has to hold the result, because if Labour lose, it's because Andy Burnham wasn't on the ballot. I'm convinced of that. And the Prime Minister personally stepped in. He puts himself on the committee that stopped Andy Burnham being allowed to run. And so I think he's going to hold that result more than most by-elections.
Okay, let me ask you this. If Labour lose, do you think Keir Starmer will be forced out? Or do you think now they're going to give him more time till the locals anyway?
I think Keir Starmer will be gone in May.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll change now, because I think people went too hard in supporting him once that stuff kicked off for them to U-turn. But I think he'll be gone in May regardless. I think he'll certainly be gone in May if they lose in Gorton and Denton. And by the way, Labour could still hold on in Gorton and Denton.
So what I think is quite interesting about this, because it's obviously going to be tight anyway, it'll be interesting to see what a Stop Reform coalition looks like in practice. And we saw it a little bit in Carefully, and we saw that it actually worked. But let's have a look here. But the other thing I'm increasingly convinced of is that if Reform continue to move up in the polls, and there's still difficulty for Labour, and the Greens and Lib Dems still continue to snap at Labour's heels, I am convinced there's going to have to be some kind of negotiation before the next general election where Green or Lib Dem candidates either stand down candidates in areas that are Reform Labour contests in order to keep Reform out. And that is going to be a huge test for Zach Polanski and Ed Davey to see if they actually would do that. And also, what would a Labour government offer them in return, and would it be PR?
So this is the biggest risk, I think, for Labour if Greens win, away from the sort of move leftwards policy stuff and the positions and the platform, is it has been, everyone knows Morgan McSweeney's strategy when he was Chief of Staff was, don't worry, everyone stop panicking. When it comes to election time, people will rally around us because we'll be the Stop Reform vote, right? People will know they have to vote Labour to stop Reform. If the Greens win this election, then they can make a very serious case that they're the Stop Reform vote. And that seriously dents Labour's abilities to make that argument around the country.
But that will only work in certain constituencies.
Yeah.
It would only work in specific progressive urban constituencies. Yeah. But those are the ones that might matter in terms of keeping Reform out. So I just wonder, are we going to see some serious negotiating going on with the left?
Have to be.
Very, very interesting. Who knows what's going to happen? But either way, we're going to be there.
Maybe all of this is what's going to give us PR.
Yeah.
Stop this nonsense where Matt Goodwin might become MP and maybe Shadow Health Secretary.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see. Right, that's it from Politics Uncensored today. Join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we unwrap the week's political talking points just ahead of the by-election.
You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani Live.
And me at Zoe Grunewald.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at fubarradio.com or via the Fubar Radio app.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.